Okay, so welcome back everybody, and we're about to start the second panel session of the day. I hope you enjoyed the networking sessions and that you were able to use the platform to have some interaction. I certainly enjoyed very much the first session, which was about SFTRs, very much from the trade repository perspective, and there was lots of talk of very good work there. So it really pleased me to hear that the industry seems to be moving in a great way. Clearly lots more work to be done, but there was a lot of talk about the kind of partnerships that have developed over the course of this regulation, particularly between market participants, vendors, and the trade repository. So I think now we're going to get to hear a bit from the vendor perspective on their experience and what they see as the challenges at the moment. So I'm going to pass on to Sarah now to introduce her panel. I'm going to hop off again, and I will see you all again before the next session. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Okay, so the tech success story. I think it's worth starting the session by just thinking about the sort of process that the industry has been through over the process of implementing SFTR. So really, it's like the whole process started back in 2009 after the financial crisis, when the FSB started with some recommendations to improve the transparency around the industry and the activity. So they took some time looking at how this could be achieved, and in 2013 came up with a series of recommendations around a reporting regime, which at the time was proposed to be 53 or 54 fields. And from a market perspective, the market was very welcoming of this, thought it was a good thing, thought that it would benefit the industry as a whole to have that level of transparency. And the FSB set up a data group to look at this and to work with the industry to produce some sensible kind of reporting regime. But by 2015, the reporting in Europe had somewhat morphed, and ESMA published their regulation, their level 1 text around the reporting regime, which, as we all know, came into effect in July 2020. So with the first reporting happening from 2020. So from the point of inception from an ESMA or a European perspective, the SFTR reporting regime has been 5 years in the making. And the industry has been sort of focusing on delivering the solution to what turned out to be a very complex set of reporting requirements. So, 155 fields, a level of matching that no one could have imagined, with very low tolerances, the requirements around things the industry had never used before, such as LEIs and specifically the UTIs. So, so quite a, I hate to use the word journey, but it's been quite a journey that the industry has been on. Today, according to the analysis at Consola, we analyse and consolidate the data from the trade repositories, and it looks like we've got about 1.3 billion euros of stock lending transactions being reported. There's about 930 million of collateral against that, and in the repo space, 13.3 billion repos being reported. It's a huge amount of data. So it's been a challenging 5 years, and I think we can call it a success story, given that most people are now successfully reporting their data at some level. So I'd like to just turn to the panel. So firstly, if I can ask each of you to introduce yourselves, and then perhaps just give us a flavour of the process, or I'm going to use that word again, the journey that your firms have been on. And what it was, or how it was that you came about the types of solutions that you now offer to the industry. So if we can start with Mark.
Hi, thanks, Sarah. So my name is Mark Byrne. I'm the product lead for SFTR at Equiland. My particular journey, or my first step on this journey, was taking the level 1 and level 2 text, reading those 400 odd pages back in late 2016. And then as we kind of went on from there, looking internally at all the places where SFTR had impacts for the products that we had internally, and then also kind of a client outreach to, I guess, educate clients on what the requirements would be, and then also think from our perspective where our particular expertise lay, and what the implications would be for us if we wanted to build a full front-to-back solution, or whether there was value in looking for someone to collaborate with us. I think we're going to come back to later.
Okay, brilliant. Jo, can you introduce yourself and tell us about your journey?
So I'm Jo Salkeld. I'm product manager at Market Access, specifically for SFTR. So I joined the firm back in February. I had a wealth of regulatory experience, and I took on the challenge of helping to build out the product for SFTR reporting. Obviously helping educate clients, provide consulting services to them on their regulatory reporting. And again, as Mark alluded to, I think we'll touch on our journey, on the rest of our journey a little bit later.
And David.
Thanks, Sarah. It's a joy to be on something like this and have an excuse to wear a shirt with a collar for the first time in probably 7 or 8 months. Those of you who don't know me, my name's David Lewis. I've been in the market a little over 25 years now in securities finance, and 9 of those at FIS. FIS being that company that perhaps you haven't heard of, but you probably know our brands: Apex Securities Finance, Apex Collateral, Global One, that kind of thing. I don't think it's too far of a stretch to call where we've come from a journey. It's certainly been a journey with some ups and downs. I was involved very early in the data experts group with the FSB, when they were first exploring this idea, and what they were trying to understand, or what they were trying to grapple with rather, was what transparency actually meant. And there were a few people around that table who were literally saying, no, we want transparency. And I kept going back, well, what do you mean by that? What does that look like? And it was quite a journey for them to understand what the original question was. That was the first hurdle they had to cross. What are we actually trying to get out of that? As a company, we've been on quite a journey, because I mean, slightly different to my colleagues on this panel, as a technology provider, in this sphere, what we've had to do is match up the fact that from our 200 plus clients around the world in the securities finance market, all of them operate their business, their part in the industry, almost in a completely different way to anybody else. It never ceases to surprise me how such a relatively plain product can be implemented in so many different ways, and to have a solution to report accurately with the kind of frequency and complexity that SFTR demands has been an uphill task, right? It's quite a complex thing. We've ended up with a module solution. So a module is applied to any one of the products, Global One or Apex, and that allowed our clients to say, look, we can have a very lightweight version, which just adds the necessary data fields for recording at trade input level, and then relying on my colleagues on the screen and many others. I'm sure we'll talk about collaboration and how fantastic that's been shortly, but they may have then passed that data on to an internal organization or a third-party organization for augmenting or adding to that, and other clients at the other end of the extreme who've gone full 100% use of the module, and they're producing their own ISO 20022 reports straight out to a TR. So from a varied start to a varied finish, it has been definitely quite a journey.
So I'm interested in, you mentioned about the kind of 200 clients and 200 different ways of undertaking securities finance trades in the market. So there's no sort of standardized model. Do you think from an industry perspective, we've missed a trick by not producing a standardized solution for SFTR?
I think with hindsight, I think that would have been fantastic. I think that would have been a great way to go. And indeed, we can perhaps see that repeating itself with CDM as a proposal. But the reality was there are too many divergent processes and so on that go on. And in the time frame allowed, even with the delay for phase 1, within that time frame, there's no way you were going to reorganize an entire industry with the kind of quantity of throughput that we were being talking about, and sometimes the inertia that affects the way things are developed and changed. There's no way they were going to cross that we as an industry were not going to cross that many hurdles in that time frame to come to a single way of doing things.
Yeah.
The differences that we've come across in the way that our clients run things is one aspect, and I think this is a multifaceted problem, right? You've got the multiple applications or multiple ways people use the applications that FIS provides, and then you've got somebody on the other side of the street who's using, you know, Broadridge or Calypso or a home built system, so to speak, who might do things in a totally different way, in a totally different system with different named fields and that kind of thing. And then you've got to try and match those up in a complex way. And then on the other side, another facet is the fact that there is interpretation of the rules themselves. So you've got lots of things going on. An example jumps to mind: early termination versus modification, you know, to get straight into the weeds. Why are we using that as a particular trade life cycle event when in fact the event, if you call a term early, then clearly it's an early termination. If you're modifying at the end of its date, then it's a modification. Lots of complexities about the way this is applied, which is just another facet on the complications of the way we actually undertake the business. So with hindsight, yes, absolutely, it would have been great to go with a standardized solution, but it just wasn't practical. I think the closest we get to the fact is this is one of the first mandated regulations where an ISO 20022 standard is being applied, and it's from that level forward we've got the standardization, not before.
Yeah. So there seems to be a lot of sort of collaborative solutions in the market, and we've mentioned this collaboration before, but just from the market's perspective, there seems to be you know, a number of different firms partnering up and collaborating to bring a specific solution to the market. And I wonder why you think, because there seems to be an element of that's the way the industry prefers it, and that's bringing the solutions to the table. Why have we had to go that route, and what's the benefit of that collaborative approach? Joe?
So at Market Access, we do two things as part of our post-trade business. That's regulatory reporting and pre-matching, and it's our bread and butter. It's two necessary items that are required for successful reporting for SFTR. And this, coupled with Equiland's pre-matching tool, certainly made for a strong joint venture. So at Market Access, we obviously have over 30 years of experience. We're an industry leader, and we offer a wide range of regulatory reporting services. So there are a few players in the industry that have the suite of regulatory reporting services that we do. And in particular, if you look at our MiFID II client base, it's strong with around 330 clients using the service. Now, it always seems that with vendors that the strongest players remain standing. So I guess take the recent wind down of the regulatory reporting at CME, which obviously the unintended consequences resulted in much of their client base coming to Market Access for our reporting services. But so I guess because of that, I see that having one vendor in particular is dangerous. It's good to have options, particularly when vendors exit the market like CME. Also, I guess for firms and their business continuity purposes. And it's also good, I guess, to have healthy competition out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark,
Sarah, if I could jump in there for 1 sec. I thought it's interesting, as David referenced earlier, you had sort of, I guess when I started out looking at the project, this hope that there's an opportunity to standardize everything, then people would take this opportunity to kind of really review from sort of the start to finish how their business operated. I think that, as Dave said, the practicalities of that proved a little bit more in the, than was achievable in the time frame. I do think a lot of people will start perhaps over the next 3 to 6 months to start to use that kind of common language that now exists to see whether they can get some standardization and get towards the kind of level of standardization that we had looked at the start. When I was on panels about maybe 3-4 years ago, the big topic that always came up is interoperability, and people talked about interoperability. I think probably they've thought of it as a sort of what I would like kind of maybe call horizontal interoperability. So kind of interoperability between books and records providers, interoperability between contract comparison providers, and or interoperability between regulatory providers. The reality, I think, is, again, going back to the point, is it was too much work to do in the time frame to put this technology solution in place and also make it interoperability. I think that was asking for too much in the time frame that was available. But what we did find was more what I would consider maybe a vertical interoperability. So you have the books and records providers kind of collaborating and communicating into the contract comparison providers, who then link down in a sort of a more vertical manner down into the trade reporting providers such as market access. So I think we've ended up with a type of interoperability, but maybe not the one that people were expecting at the start.
I think that's true. I think that's very, very clear what Mark was saying then, that I hadn't quite thought about it that way, but he's absolutely right. The vertical interoperability, we had a lot of activity as we connected through to the different other providers in this space. And I have to say that, you know, we wouldn't have got where we got without that collaboration, and hats off to everybody who's been involved with this, from all the different, actually put everything aside and said, go on, we as an industry, we have to solve this. And I think that's been a fantastic thing for all of us.
Yeah, I have to say, in terms of the kind of the tech success story, it always seems to me as a non-practitioner, if you like, that the industry has sort of learnt some lessons from other reporting regimes, such as the EMEA regime, identified the complexities very sort of quickly through, you know, the ISLA working groups and the ICMA working groups, and bringing the industry together, but recognising the complexities, both from, as you were saying, David, in terms of the sort of, you know, there's no single model in the market, to the complexities of the data requirements itself, and looked at the lessons from other regimes and brought best of breed, really. So I think, you know, now we're in a situation where within the market there are a number of different solutions, a number of different firms collaborating, and actually there's a solution out there for everybody. So the sort of connectivity into the SFTR reporting regime has been a complete success story in terms of bringing the experts, whether they're experts in securities finance or whether they're experts in reporting like market access, and bringing them together to produce the solutions for the market. So I think,
Sarah, can I throw a slight spanner in that, just for a bit of fun? Yeah, there is a lot. When I first when I first had this panel suggested to me, I did wonder whether SFTR, the tech success story, was either a statement or a question, because yeah, there has been a great deal of very good things come out of it, but I would say that's not all been plain sailing. I was intrigued by the Capitec survey that came out in the last day or two, and just to quote from that, I'm just going to look at 46% of the respondents consider SFTR a major challenge for 2021. So clearly lots of people are thinking this is not over. There's still an awful lot left to do. The other stat that stuck out to me, 66% give a lack of expertise as a major concern, highlighting specifically the crossover between people who are experts in reporting, as Jo mentioned, that her firm has a huge history of this, they do very well at it, to other people who have knowledge of the market, such as securities lending and repo. And perhaps there aren't many people with both of those, or foot in both of those camps. And that's what's identified in that survey. So yeah, it has been a difficult journey. It has been a lot of success, but I think if we believe what's written in that survey, then there's a huge amount of work left to do.
Yeah, I think that brings us on very nicely, David, actually, because I mentioned before that Consolo does some analysis around the data as reported by the trade repositories. And I should have brought some slides with me. I could have put some slides up for the latest analysis, but it's all available on our website for anybody to view. But in that analysis, there's some quite interesting trends coming out, which sort of raise some questions. So one of them is that there's a significant less in value of collateral being reported than there is of securities lent. Now we know that because we're reporting executed stock loans, but position collateral, that there's never going to be a perfect match between those two, and that you're never going to be able to to be confident around that. But we think there's something sort of more happening here in terms of the reporting of the non-cash collateral specifically. And this is sort of relating back to the backdating or backloading rather, because the collateral is being reported on a position basis, regardless of whether it's relating to reported SFTRs or trades that haven't been backloaded as such. But then that would suggest that there should be an overvalue of collateral rather than an undervalue of collateral. So there's something in the non-cash collateral, and there's obviously an issue around the reporting of that. Now, ESMA have stated, and they did this through the ISLA outreach process, that their first focus would be on non-reporting rather than anything else, and that after a period of time they'll start to look more at kind of whether the reporting is accurate and whether there's any sort of misreporting or errors going on. So do you think that whilst it is a success story in terms of, you know, everyone successfully reporting something, do you think that what we're actually reporting is really sort of true and accurate data, or do you think there's a lot more work to be done in that space? It's like in the next phase. Is that what we're now looking at, sort of moving into? I will start, Mark. I'll open that to you.
Sure, Sarah. Thanks. I think the focus really has been, as you referenced, on the reporting process, and the ACK rate that's been reported by the TRs of I think sort of 98% plus is where the term success, or why we define it as a success, really. That in other regimes, that number has been considerably lower from day one and maybe up until like a year later. So I think the fact that the reports are coming through, partly, I think, testament to a lot of work that's been done by industry bodies and various different working groups to kind of get a common understanding of what the requirements are. And that data then being, as I said, sent through the various vendors and brought down to the TR. So that is a success. Because we have the phase 3, the second wave and phase 3, depending on how you want to define it, just coming on board in the last few weeks, probably will be maybe early next year before we start to see real detailed analysis of the data quality and what those reconciliation feedbacks are like. So I think throughout the course of 2021, you will see some adjustments to people's data models. And I think there will be an improvement in the quality of the reporting, quality of the matching. Just probably a little bit too early to say right at this moment what that's going to look like.
David or Joe, anything to add to that?
I'm intrigued by the statement you used a couple of times, that everybody's reported something. You know, like that's a measure of success. That as long as we get something sent in, then clearly the ESMA might put us to the bottom of the list for analysing what we do. So it's an intriguing kind of measurement. But on the previous panel this morning, there was a comment related to that, where one of the panelists said there was a lack of reporting, possibly because people weren't reporting anything where they didn't have an LEI. It might be just as simple as that. So there are fundamental gaps that need to be filled. What I took from that is there's fundamental gaps that need to be filled in reference data, for example, and organizations saying, look, 10% of the counterparties that I deal with don't have an LEI, therefore I'm not reporting it, and therefore it's not making it into the reporting it. And obviously I'd pick that 10% out off the top of my head, but is that an aspect? I mean, I'm not close enough to that data, perhaps Joe or Mark are, but is that one of the simple fixes, perhaps?
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think personally, we're being in the SFTR space, the securities financing space, we're being maybe quite hard on ourselves, because if you look at the what happened previously with other regulations that were implemented, I do think SFTR has definitely been relatively successful. I mean, we can attest to this at Market Access. We were seeing some firms who started their testing extremely early, and then they had the opportunity to test even further, particularly with the delays because of COVID. And these firms are now achieving almost 100% ACK rate. And that was obviously also mentioned by Catherine earlier in the TR panel. I guess with the data, obviously, looking again back at what the regulators are looking at from it took so long for EMIR pairing and matching to actually, come into place. Firms were only, what was it now, 6 years on now, looking at their pairing and matching rates and how they can improve that. And I think just to add as well, with SFTR, I think firms are also now looking to vendors to ensure that their data is accurate, and that the reporting is accurate. We have a UTI portal, which with our experience, we identified that previously with EMIR reporting, sharing a UTI was extremely painful, and it's particularly within the regulatory reporting timeframe. So what we did is recognise, we launched and built our UTI portal, which allows firms to, within an efficient and timely manner, share key SFTR data, including the UTI, collateral allocation data, loan allocation data. So with all of that, following the go live, I guess, with from phase 1 and phase 3, we're still seeing firms that are struggling with the sharing of the UTI and being able to report data in an efficient and timely manner. So they're now obviously looking to vendors such as ourselves, knowing that we have a mechanism that works. And this is obviously helping them with their SFTR reporting. But again, I think we are, the securities financing industry is being particularly hard on themselves with this. I think it's relatively successful.
David, I remember in early sort of meetings and discussions in the industry that there was a lot of talk about, from the client perspective, that need to standardize some of their processes and workflows in order to make this happen. And I know ISLA had done a lot of work in the corporate action space specifically. From your clients' perspectives, what sort of lessons have they learned, and what sort of changes have you seen in order for us to adopt and improve in the SFTR space?
Well, I think that's right. I think there's been, this has presented, in fact, a good opportunity, because we have a situation where the regulatory imperative to meet a set deadline with some quite stringent and demanding requirements, both in complexity and frequency, has led to people investing money where it perhaps should have been invested long ago. So we have situations where a lot of our clients have done a lot of process re-engineering. For example, making sure they're on the latest version, making sure they've got the right modules, instead of, I think we've all been guilty at times of massaging a trade into a structure or a trade input that perhaps it shouldn't be. I'm sure Viva never did that, or Morley.
Never.
I think you told me once, Sarah, your first securities finance trading system was a supermarket system where they used to lend to each other, literally stock as in baked beans. So the massaging of trades into perhaps structures or records that were not optimum is something that a lot of organizations have dealt with in the past as they've developed their systems and so on. But now with as I said, a regulatory imperative, they've had to say, look, we've got to do this properly. There is a regulatory axe hanging over our heads that we've got to be able to report a securities lending trade as a securities lending trade, not as a repo, or vice versa. They've got to bill properly, they've got to mark properly, they've got to report their collateral, the right granularity, at the right frequency. So it's been a huge experience from that point of view. And long term, I see huge benefit from that, because that standardization will allow us to do more things in a more efficient way. There'll be less reconciliation issues, there'll be less matching problems, there'll be less data errors, and our business overall will become much more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a question coming in from the audience, and they're asking whether the panel thinks that all this data being reported will achieve the objectives of the regulator. So David, you mentioned sort of early on, it's like trying to pin down what they meant by transparency. But do you think the data that's being provided will allow them to understand the industry better and understand what's going on?
That's a great question, actually. As I recall from those very early meetings, and the regulators were demanding transparency, but not quite understanding what that meant. and it has been a journey to get to them to understand it. But what they distilled over quite a long period of time and quite a few meetings was to understand in very broad terms, and I'm talking FSB level now rather than perhaps individual regulator. From FSB's point of view, they want to be able to understand in very broad terms the movement of pressure, for want of a better word. So they want to understand that perhaps if there's an increase in borrowing from European-based pension funds compared with the last quarter or the last period last year, or the similar period last year, or compared to its peers, does that mean there's a pressure on those markets? Why is that happening and what should we do about it? So they want to understand the broad flows and understand the pro-cyclicality, which I can never say properly, of those interconnected businesses. And another key word that's come out of this is interconnectedness or interdependency. If they can understand these broad flows of liquidity and collateral, then what they're hoping to do is understand where the next pinch point is going to be and perhaps preempt the kind of thing that we saw 10 or 12 years ago with that kind of pinch point of liquidity and problems from that point of view. That's the objective. This data will go some way towards that, but and to quote Mr. Dyson, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. They clearly need to try and achieve the objective of measuring it. And I think given the comments that we've made in this panel and the one before with the lack of a full picture, the lack of an accurate picture, either they can't do that yet, or possibly an even worse scenario, they're going to try and do it now on the data they've got and run around with their hair on fire going, well, you're under-collateralized, there's not enough collateral, The market is clearly lying to us in terms of its security and safety should another default happen. So there's a lot of concern, certainly in my mind, as to where we go next with that data and whether it's really going to meet that objective in the near term.
Yeah, I think it's a key area. It's like understanding that data, because I mean, the examples you gave, David, and also the potential of seeing a position being built in the market, which may be a perfectly valid and innocent kind of transaction, but a sort of a domestic regulator jumping on that, assuming that something is happening when in fact it's not, and sort of imposing restrictions on trading against it. I mean, I do think we're a long way off that.
Miss the black swan as it's passing by,
Absolutely. I think that's a real area. So in terms of,
sorry, Sarah, just on one level, I think it is interesting that even on the data that's being published by the TRs, that kind of amalgamation of data that you referenced at the start, you're starting to see at least some information that previously would have been garnered maybe by an ICMA survey or a survey of the stock lending world, but you're actually getting to see whether that data is complete or not. You're at least getting that first initial view of what some of this data might be.
I think as well, just to add to that, we also need to remember the S and F of SFTR, so securities financing. And obviously securities financing data helps to allow for, I guess, better pricing discovery and therefore create better efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, actually. I'm interested, so just mindful of the time, I'm interested in your thoughts about other jurisdictions. And so, on the assumption that SFTR is a success story, and that whilst there's still work to be done, actually, we've done a reasonably good job as an industry in the European markets. What about other jurisdictions? It's like, and do you think other markets will adopt the same level of complexity, or do you think it would be unlikely for that to happen? I think it's unlikely it would be more complicated, would it, Mark?
You would hope not. I'm sure they can try. I think when you look back to that FSB report that you referenced previously, that kind of purview is a global view. They're looking for a global regulation model. Obviously, it's been implemented in Europe to begin with. I think there will be some version of it. In terms of the way we've implemented our model, we've tried to future-proof our clients from that by kind of gathering all the data, not just the information that needs to be reported for SFTR, but going across all the various allocations and various levels of data. I mean, it's a little difficult to call. I think the first piece we're going to see of that is Brexit. We're going to see a divergence of some type, as was referenced on the earlier panel. As to when and where that happens, it's probably a little early to say. We will see some divergence in that regard. And I think then you'll find other jurisdictions around the globe might start to put their own version in, maybe fewer fields, maybe less frequent, month to month. But I think you'll end up with a roughly equivalent system being populated around the globe over the course of, it's difficult to say, maybe the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah,
I think there could be, it could well be a copy. I mean, I think Mark's right. I think it would be a challenge to see someone get more complicated or more frequent than SF has become. In the same way that I think, as Joe identified, we have learnt a lot from previous regimes and been able to apply that to implementation of SFTR. So for EMEA, for example, and other things that we've learned as an industry, a wider industry, and we've learned those lessons, and perhaps that's part of the success of SFTR's implementation. I think there is potentially still a long way to go with that data and understanding whether that's going to be the right answer and where the other jurisdictions will apply that. They could simply say, well, we're going to copy SFTR. In some ways, that'll be great because we've got all the hard work's done. We've got the structures in place, but some regulators, have in the past shown that they want to go their own way, even just for the sake of it. They're going to make their own mark on this thing and interpret it as they see fit. So we might see, position reporting, which arguably might be easier, but of course is then a different build to what we've done. So it's all to play for, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. So one of the results of SFTR is that firms have huge amounts of additional enriched data about their programs. It's like, and this data at the moment is obviously, the focus is on ensuring that the regulators get the reporting requirements, but ultimately, as this all moves forward, firms are going to look to see what they can do with that data. Can you see any value to the data internally and how it could be used? And specifically for you, David, in terms of the performance measurements and the performance sort of systems that we have in the securities finance industry, which are long established FIS and IHS markets specifically. Do you, sorry, and data lend, shouldn't forget data lend with markets, sorry.
Thanks, Sarah.
But do you think that the SFTR data will change that landscape? And do you think there's a value or a use for that data internally at the firms? Mark, should we start with you?
Sure. Look, I think there's kind of two elements of this as I look at it. One relates to the way in which we referenced it earlier, sort of the data standardization. So when we think about this, we look at it in two elements. One is kind of matching data at point of trade. So we have NGTR trading platform, clients using that to get their data standardized and matched at that point of trade. And then also in the post-trade world, in the what we call a kind of point of process. So we have a new product called GEM, which is Global Event Management, which is about life cycle management and the exchange of messaging on a life cycle basis. So if when you want to communicate a rate change or a return or whatever via that kind of messaging that's agreed. So I think that's the next step when we think of kind of the data standardization and the process of that becoming aligned. Once you get into that world where you have a standard understanding of what the data is and the kind of common language, I think maybe the CDM model that ISLA is working on. Also, one point I would reference just in terms of the kind of the how this leads towards a greater automation. I think the fact of the existence of COVID and how that has changed people working from home, they historically has been maybe in the operational world a kind of view of just throwing a number of people at a problem, whereas now that option isn't really there in the same sort of way. You need to actually throw investment and technology at the problem and solve it that way. So when I think about the uses of the data, we have a series of I would call them whiz kids who are based out of our New York office, looking at kind of the sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning. They speak a language which frankly I don't perfectly understand. They're very excited about the data, the quality of the data, and the standardization of that data going forward. So I think that's really, I leave it to people who know better how to do this sort of stuff, but there is definitely that opportunity, I think, as we move forward.
Brilliant.
I think just in the closing seconds, I think I'm just going to say that absolutely huge amounts of value in that data. I think all three of the major data providers would agree with me that getting that data out of our clients sometimes is a bit difficult in terms of we're realistic in the fact that it's perhaps not the #1
priority on the development list in terms of technology output and so on. But SFTR has been very high on that priority list, and that enrichment of the way that people gather data internally to report externally is bound to have a positive impact on the way we can monitor, manage and improve performance in programs. I think it's a win-win for all the providers as well as all of our clients.
Brilliant. Joe, just as a closing, I'm mindful that we're now running over, but I need to ask you about this. In the other reporting regimes such as EMEA, have we seen any sort of data use coming out of that? Are internal firms using that data more to make efficiencies and things?
Certainly, obviously, with again looking in comparison to EMEA, with SFTR comes the requirement to look for platforms to automate processes and to allow for reporting to become easier, to remove the manual burden on ops teams. Obviously, we've seen with EMEA that the regulators are becoming more interested in the data that they're receiving. Obviously, they've also had, they based on the industry working groups, they're receiving feedback, and based on the feedback they're receiving, they're obviously tightening the regulation further. Obviously, we've seen the EMEA refit, so the data is obviously being utilised. And again, just to go back to Mark and David's point, so obviously data allows to come into the new world of technology, and obviously through AI and machine learning, it can obviously help facilitate enhanced processes and assist with the completeness, accuracy and timeliness required for reporting under, for example, EMEA and SFTR.
Brilliant. So I think it's one of those, just to close really before the break, as David said, is SFTR a success story or tech success story? And I think it's very clear to see where we are, and for so many firms to have met those initial requirements and initial reporting dates, then undoubtedly it is a success story. I think we're not very good at kind of patting ourselves on the back as an industry, but actually by bringing these firms together and by the vendors working together and collaborating, actually the tech success around SFTR is undeniable. Clearly there's lots of work to do. Clearly there's lots of improvements in accuracy and data kind of flows and more work to be done around standardization. But I think the upside of SFTR and the exciting bit about SFTR is the opportunities that it will bring. Firstly, when the next jurisdiction comes along with the complex reporting, it won't take us 5 years. It's like this won't be a kind of all-consuming process for the industry. It'll seem like a light work, and then the opportunity to use that data going forward and the opportunities that it might bring to the industry, so that it's not just a regulatory reporting requirement, but actually a benefit to the industry, is phenomenal if we can carry on developing those technology solutions around that data. So I think we're over time, as is traditional. I think that after this session there is a virtual coffee break, so people can visit some of the sponsor sites and have some meetings, and then I think we're coming back for the next session. So just remains for me to thank Mark, Joe and David. I hope everyone's found that session useful, and we look forward to the next session.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye-bye.